A reminder to check out Unfound's website, the unfoundpodcast.com. Joseph Michael Bushling was a 26-year-old from Dugway, Utah. He was in the Army there and was pursuing a career in medicine. In the early morning of May 8th, 2011, according to the official story, Joe drove off the base. 15 hours later, Joe called a fellow soldier saying he needed help. The car was eventually found. Joe was not. He was never seen again. I'm Ed Dentzel, and this is Unfound. I have a variety of different kinds of relationships with the people who have appeared on Unfound. You know, the people I call the guests. They range from the very familiar, like Lisa Cassoon, sister of Chip Campbell, to Joyce Rivituzzo, mother of Peggy and Patty McDaniel, to Kelly Bruce Kashnauer, expert on Brian Schaefer, to Jeff Wise, the authority on Flight 370. To the very unfamiliar, like Veronica Freer, who hasn't spoken to me since her interview in 2017. That is not a criticism of Veronica. In fact, I would love to talk to her again. I'm just stating this to show that in my position, even though I'm the same person, doing the same podcast, asking many of the same questions, the guests, depending on their own situations and needs, see me very differently from person to person. Well, today with Joe Bushling, this is a prime example of this. But this isn't just about me. It's about all of you as well. We are help. And now a summary of the case. Joe Bushling decided to go into the Army, and by most accounts, it was going well for him. Yes, Joe wasn't too pleased about being stationed at Dugway, which was out in the middle of nowhere, unlike most other posts in the United States. But Joe was on the verge of being transferred to Texas and seemed to be excited about it. Yet, during the investigation into his disappearance, some issues about Joe were exposed, problems not known to his family. He seemingly stole some Ambien from a house where he had stayed. In addition, his ex-wife claimed she divorced Joe because of depression and addiction issues that he ignored. Overall, though, this was an outlier in people's assessments of Joe. So, on May 8th, 2011, in the evening, according to the public account, Joe called another soldier, Brandon Springer. Joe claimed he ran out of gas. He was out in the desert not far from the base. He was cold, and Joe was attempting to walk back, but he needed help. Brandon advised his superior of the situation, and many soldiers went out to look for Joe in the area where they thought Joe was. They did not find him. He was never seen again. However, the car Joe was driving, a friend's, was found in the general area that he described. And yes, it was out of gas. However, there were no fingerprints on it anywhere, and its GPS device told a story that seemingly contradicts the official public account. Also, a hat possibly belonging to Joe was found on the route he would have taken to walk back to the base. Anybody who has tried to assist families with their cases has run into a situation where the family is set on one theory when really multiple should be examined. Contemplate how this can best be handled while you also try to answer these 3 questions during the interview. Number 1, why was Brandon Springer not asked very obvious questions by law enforcement about his connection to Joe? Number 2, How much does Joe's ex-wife's assessment of him factor into your thoughts on his disappearance? And number 3, does the GPS device absolutely 100% contradict the story told about what Joe did on the night of May 7th, 2011? Joe's family absolutely believes foul play caused his disappearance. The guest for this episode is the private investigator who worked on Joe's disappearance at the request of Joe's family, Lex Bell. Unfound news. My Zoom appearance at Texas A&M University went very well. Heck, I even had a student tell me I had a great radio voice, which is a first in my podcasting career. I hope to appear there again next semester. Next, yep, I know I just appeared on Dr. T's show a week ago, but I will be there again on November 14th at 7 p.m. Eastern on her channel to discuss the disappearance to discovery of Bo Man. Finally, yes, that big shindig happened a few days ago. Some of you won, some of you lost. Remember, for all of you, it's neither as great nor as bad as you may feel. I'm so happy to have on this episode of Unfound a man who has actually investigated the disappearance of Joe Bushling. His name is Lex Bell. Lex, welcome to Unfound.
Thank you for having me. Glad I could finally get on the show.
You're very welcome. For everybody, what Lex means there is we've kind of been two ships passing in the night. Lex, very busy guy. As everybody knows, I'm a busy guy. But we found time here on November 3rd, the afternoon of November 3rd of 2024, to do this interview. So Lex, finally good to talk to you. We've had so many email exchanges over the last 2 months.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, excited.
Very good. Let's start here. Let's just talk a little bit about you. Of course, you're not a family member. We usually have family members about, 85% of the time, but we've had private investigators, people in law enforcement as guests, so this isn't so unusual. Why don't you tell everybody a little bit about your background, and then we'll get into how you first heard about Joe's disappearance, etc. But you first.
Okay. Yeah, I been a police officer at this point in my life with about a year and a half break in between, 24 years.
Wow.
I started with the Salt Lake County Sheriff's Office in Salt Lake City, Utah, at the age of 21. As soon as I could start, spent 4 years working kind of the west side there on patrol, then 5 years undercover in our Metro Gang Unit. At the same time, I made the SWAT team, and I was a sniper on the SWAT team for 7 years.
Wow.
And was rarely home, being an undercover gang detective and on the SWAT team at the same time. I was a busy man, but a lot of really cool experiences there.
Mm-hmm.
Promoted to sergeant, worked on the east side of Salt Lake County for a couple more years, and then went to Midvale, which is kind of the south end of the county. The Salt Lake County Sheriff's Office changed its name to the Unified Police Department in 2010. Little history.
Okay.
So, same agency, different name, but was with them more or less my whole career until recently. And then went back to the Metro Gang Unit as a supervisor for another 4 years. From that, I promoted to lieutenant and was assigned to our DEA task force as the deputy director of our HIDTA task forces in the western region, so Utah, Wyoming, Montana. It was a fun assignment.
Mm-hmm.
A federal job normally, but there's usually a local deputy director, and because of my experience, I had that. And then went back to the Unified Police Department, was the executive officer over the entire investigative unit, which is a little over 100 detectives, centralized in all the big investigations in the county, from homicides, sex crimes, missing persons, you name it. And did that for a while. Was the spokesperson for the police department for a couple of years, and then ended up leading to another agency that was a newly forming agency. Worked there for a couple of years, and then decided to retire. I got out of the rat race after my third back surgery, facing a fourth.
Wow.
Injuries. Yeah, got hit by a car in high school. overcame it, but SWAT, running and gunning for years and years and years, it catches up. So I had 3 back surgeries, was facing a 4th, retired, got into the private sector right during COVID. It was not awesome. And then got my private investigative license. Found that I could still do that. I was good at that stuff, so figured, well, let's do it this way and carry less gear around, and maybe that'll be easier on my back. So I did that for about a year and a half or so, and then after having a 4th back surgery, got back into law enforcement, where I'm still currently in law enforcement in Moab, Utah.
Okay. Wow. All right, so it's a lot of different. So what we're saying here is you have a lot of law enforcement experience, a lot of investigation experience, a lot of collecting information on crime experience. Tons.
Absolutely. Yeah, tons.
Okay.
Yep. And this assignment here in Moab is a little more rural area. I mean, everybody's heard of Moab if you're adventure seeker, but that's the chief of police here. It's been a great experience.
Fantastic. We should make clear, Joe's disappearance did not happen in your jurisdiction. As far as your official capacity now here in 2024, this happened somewhere else. For anybody who's not familiar with Utah, this did not happen in your jurisdiction, and you are not responsible for it now.
No, never was responsible, never investigated it back when it occurred. It was in an adjacent county,
right,
from Salt Lake,
right,
on a military base. Yeah, so
okay.
no official involvement ever. Hired many years later when I was a civilian private investigator,
right,
to look into it.
Okay, very good. Want to just make that clear for anybody, especially for those people who are not familiar with Utah. Where Joe went missing and where Lex is responsible for now, 2 totally different areas. The missing persons report and everything is not in where his responsibilities lie today. Now, so what we're saying is when you got involved, and we're going to talk about, this is why you're here today, it was in your capacity in that year or so as a private investigator is how you got involved? Is that?
Yes. That's correct. Yep, I was hired by a private investigative company as a contract investigator.
Okay.
Based on my experience, to take another look at this case.
Okay.
Unsolved.
All right. So it's just kind of, I guess we might even say a coincidence. This just all happened to happen in that year where you were a private investigator exclusively.
Yeah, absolute coincidence.
Okay. Now, before you got started, before they had contacted you, had you ever heard of Joe Bushling's disappearance before? Was it on your radar at all? What do you remember about that?
I briefly remember news the summer that it happened. A few different stories of a missing soldier that was missing from Dugway, but not. Then I honestly had kind of forgotten that it happened. Never really knew the resolution. I don't think I really heard any follow-up. It was not in our jurisdictional area, so you know what I mean. I went on with my life and never thought about it again until 2021.
Okay, all right. So you just on the fringes, and once again, tell everybody. You kind of explained it, but more in depth now. How did you become involved as a private citizen, private investigator in getting involved? And of course, eventually doing this very, very long report that we're using, kind of following today in our notes. I mean, how did you get involved? How did somebody track you down and say, hey, Lex, we'd like you to take a look at this?
I was contacted by Panther Investigations, the private investigative company in Salt Lake, who I did contract work for, who had been hired by Kevin Bushling, and it might have been some other private citizens who were looking into this again or doing some more follow-up. And I was asked to come in and review everything and see if I could find anything else to go on.
Okay. Any idea how they picked you out? I mean, there's a lot of private investigators in Utah. Any idea how you ended up at the top of the list?
I don't know how I think it was Kevin found Panther.
Yeah.
But I was Panther's lead investigator for anything criminal or potentially criminal or very involved, like a missing person case, because I had the most experience. I spent, all but maybe 5 years of my career in an investigative role and some pretty major investigations.
Okay, very good. And when was this? Of course, we know when he went missing, but how long after he went missing did you did you get involved? Do you remember?
It was almost 10 years exactly.
Wow.
I believe it was in spring, summer of 2021.
Wow. Okay. So we're already looking at that time, 10 years. So of course, we're over 13 years now since he went missing. But already, when you got involved, it was already 10 years had passed.
Yeah.
Okay.
A lot had happened, and quite a while later.
Okay. I have to ask, is this one of those things where, I guess you have a choice. I guess you could have said no to it, but you said yes. Was there any in particular compelling reason, something that caught your attention about it, anything, that personally motivated for you? Or was it just, I'm just doing this is what I do and it's the next job?
It's a job. There were good reasons. The biggest one was personal. When I talked to Kevin a little bit, kind of learned the background, was this man wanted to find his son and find out what happened to him.
Mm-hmm.
I really love challenges. This seemed like an absolutely gigantic challenge.
True.
And I love putting puzzles together.
Me too.
I've worked cold cases before, and I really wanted. It seemed very, very interesting to me, even before I had read anything. That gosh, there's got to be some sort of clue we can go on, and maybe I can find it. So it was a challenge, I think, a little bit.
Yeah. In meeting, now everybody should know, I've had some exchanges with Kevin, and Lex knows how those went, and I will say as much as I feel comfortable saying in my own part of this episode, but we're just going to keep this as professional as possible, as factual-based possible. Your impressions of meeting Kevin for the first time, of course, this is only 3 years ago now. If you can say, of course, I would never ask anything private or anything like that, but just your overall dealings with Kevin.
Mine were all very positive to begin with, and through most of my interaction with him while I still was involved with Panther. Mm-hmm. He seemed like a motivated individual who just did not want to accept that his son was lost in the desert forever. Okay. He was very hands-on too. He really and had done a lot of his own digging. I found, as time went by and we talked more, he'd been very involved in it. And as a father, I would imagine, I hope none of us ever know what he's gone through, but it would be hard to sleep at night knowing. Of course. Not knowing, I guess, is the biggest thing.
Yep. That's what everybody says, whether they're in law enforcement, private investigator, friend, or family. That's what they all say. The not knowing is the worst part, for sure.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. So he gets a hold of Panther. Panther finds you. You get involved, and you worked kind of, I guess, one-on-one with Kevin, kind of getting to know Joe and all of that.
Yeah, Kevin, and then there were some filmmakers that became involved at some point. I couldn't tell you anything about them at this point, though. I don't know if there was ever an actual film made. I want to say that they were from Europe.
Wow. Okay.
But I don't know. Yeah, I don't know where that ever went. But yeah, originally, and for most of it, Kevin and I spoke in person or on the phone. He provided information to Panther, who gave me copies not gave me copies, but allowed me access to them through their server that they have, that I had access to, so I could review mountains and mountains and mountains of reports, evidence, photos. Okay. Another investigator with Panther, who was a technical expert, we had recovered a TomTom GPS device, and with new technology, she was able to get into that and pull records and information that had never before been found.
Okay. All right, we're going to talk about that a little bit. All right, so you were working on it, but there were some others, people who were also working on it, assisting or had specialties.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, very good. All right, so now we have like the background, how Lex became all involved in this. I'm just going to ask you a very general question, and of course, this was just 3 years ago, but if any of your attitudes have changed since 2021, please tell the listeners. What is your general attitude? Like you said, you've been in law enforcement since 21 years old. I'm going to guess that you filled out maybe a few missing persons reports in your day. What is your general attitude, your process when you're trying to do, when trying to find out when somebody went missing? I realize there's all different types and all different people and everything, but what's just your general step-by-step process?
Well, you have to look at the circumstances of when they went missing and then try to put together the facts leading up to when they went missing and what's going on in their life at the time. Yeah. I would say a vast majority of missing persons would be closer to, define them as runaways. Okay. And often, with a runaway or somebody just trying to clear their head, that they'll probably show back up in a day or two, and that usually does happen, right? So, but you can't let yourself be jaded by that. And I got the impression in this case a little bit that some folks were like, it didn't seem like people took it as seriously out the gate as they should have. They were just like, it's just another missing person. He's an adult. He's got the right to leave or do whatever. But a little different if you look at the buildup on this. So I like to know as much background as I can get especially when it's an adult, especially when there are some circumstances that don't necessarily make sense. So you gotta speak to people, family, those who know them, and you can't have the attitude that it's just a missing person, he'll show up eventually. You have to approach everything like it's a homicide and then go backward from there. Let's de-escalate it from that. But that comes with experience, I think, and it is difficult when 99 out of 100 cases you ever work that are missing persons, they show back up.
Yeah. They kind of solve themselves.
They do. They really do. They just resolve.
Right.
But if you have that attitude, I think you may miss steps up front that you can't get back.
Yeah.
And that was one thing I think I kind of noticed in this one was maybe there was kind of a nonchalant attitude in some of the investigative side. Now, I don't think there was nonchalant in trying to find him as a missing person when they, went out looking and searching. They did extensive searching, but so my process is gather as much information as possible, speak to everyone who's seen them in the last couple of days, try to get a feel for what was going on in that person's life, in their head, emotionally, mentally, physically, and keep in mind that often if there is foul play, it's the last person that saw them is somebody that you really want to focus on or talk to.
Sure. Okay. All right. So that's your process. And would you say, just once again, you have many years, would you say that Joe's disappearance is maybe the most complex, most, one of the more difficult ones as far as putting the facts together and everything that you've ever experienced? Or is there maybe one or other two that also catch your attention in your personal experience?
I have a couple white whales out there, if you will, but this is one of the top 2 or 3 most confusing and frustrating. Yeah. And when you get involved years down the road, it's always an uphill battle, even more of an uphill battle. But this one's, this is top 2.
Okay. All right. Very good. Thank you. Let's move on to this. Now, of course, remembering you did not know Joe. You didn't come in until 10 years after his disappearance. But just, of course, in general, kind of the feeling that you got in talking to Kevin, maybe talking to any other family members, maybe talking to any of Joe's friends. Whoever else you talk to, some people might have known Joe. Just in general, what kind of idea did you get about him? Of course, he was in the military at Dugway, and we're going to get into that in a bit. But just in general, Joe, what can you say about him?
From what I understood, Joe was an avid outdoorsman. Loved to be outside and do things outside. A lot of experience camping and everything else. Sounded like he had a rough year or so before he went missing with a family member committing suicide. That will affect anybody, terribly. But he was an individual who was generally knew the outdoors, liked to be outdoors. I don't know if that drove him to join the Army or not, but he wanted to help people, which is why he was doing medical stuff. But he also had some struggles and some. He had been divorced very, very recently.
Yep.
He had some substance abuse issues. I'm not certain where maybe that started, but he was a complex person.
Okay.
Who had some stuff going on, but in all ways of looking at it, at least from those who I've spoken with, it sounded like things were taking a turn for the better for him, and things were looking up.
Right.
He was assigned to a pretty difficult post at Dugway. Don't know anyone that wants to go there. So.
Well, let's go right into being that's the next thing on the outline anyway. All right, so we have Joe, and in fact, we know that Joe is actually going to be leaving Dugway for a different place in the military in Texas. Maybe we'll come back to that in a bit. But when you bring up Dugway being a maybe a unique post, a unique base, maybe a difficult base as you put it, what do you mean?
So Dugway, also known as Dugway Proving Grounds, Dugway is in a very remote part of western Utah, and is so remote that getting there will almost have you out of fuel if you don't have a big gas tank or fuel tank. And there's nowhere to fill with gas other than the base. The base is very isolated and very top secret. There's a lot of old weapons stored there, or munitions stored there in special bunkers. I don't know that anyone that doesn't work there even knows, exactly what is out there. I do know that they do a lot of specialized training with special units around the military out in that area. But it is super isolated, hot, dry, not a very fun place to be, and there is nothing to do. If you're an outdoorsy person, there's some things to do, but you don't like sagebrush and cedars and dirt, because that's all that's there.
Okay. So you would say, as far as you can tell, one of the more remote military bases in the United States?
Yeah, I would say for certain it is. Okay. And that's possibly, likely why they do store the things that they do there, the weapons of mass destruction and so forth, that were there to be an issue, there's no surrounding cities that are going to go boom. Okay.
All right, so this is a unique place, and we're not going to get into I don't know if we even know how Joe ended up being there, but he had been there, was stationed there, and that is where he went missing from. Right? That's where he was stationed. Okay. Let's move on to this, and we're going to talk quite a bit later about a guy. His name is Brandon Springer. Just in general, who is he?
Brandon Springer was another soldier stationed at Dugway, an associate of Joe. In some reports, a friend, and others maybe not a friend.
Okay.
But someone that he worked with and knew, was acquainted with, and Brandon Springer was the last person who claimed to have seen Joe and talked to Joe the day of his disappearance on the phone.
Okay. And we're going to come back to that, but did you, maybe I should ask you point blank, in your work putting this very extensive report on Joe's disappearance together, Did you ever have a chance to talk to Brandon one-on-one? Did you ever try to do that? What was the status of that?
That was the next thing that I wanted to do when we were basically, told we were done.
Huh.
I want to say maybe it was a funding, a money thing, not certain.
Okay.
I wasn't paying the bills. This kind of thing obviously can get expensive when you
Right.
have this many man hours involved. So
Sure.
that could have been it. But I did want to talk to Brandon Springer. I did find out where he was at that point and was planning to talk to him, but I never did. And I would have loved to.
Okay.
At this point, probably not my place at all, but he was spoken to a lot. But I really had some questions of my own I wanted to ask him.
Sure, I'm sure. Given, of course, his name's out there, we're not talking out of school here. But he does, he will play a prominent role later. But it's not a situation, this is just an example, where you tried to contact him and he blew you off, or you were supposed to talk to him and he no-called, no-showed. In fact, you never did actually contact him. You wanted to, but the assignment stopped first.
Yeah, that is correct. I found where he was, asked if I could do it, and was told, no, we're wrapping up.
Okay.
So that was that.
Was that somebody at Panther Investigations that made that determination?
Yeah, management there who handles the money. I would imagine that had to be what it was.
Okay. And approximately how long did you work on this?
Oh, boy. Off and on, amongst my caseload, I guess, some hours a day or some, I would say I worked on it for maybe 2 months, off and on, sometimes 12, 15 hours in one day.
Wow.
And a few hours other days.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of man hours.
Okay.
I spent time out in the area myself, following, drove out there, followed GPS coordinates, just trying to map together and see from my own eyes some of the stuff that we discovered and get an idea.
Right. All right, so 2 months, at least, of course, some days 15 hours, some days 3 hours, but from start to end, a total of 2 months on the calendar.
Yeah, thereabouts. Yep.
Okay. All right. Let's move on to this. Kind of already touched upon this. What is, it's something that certainly I think catches anybody's attention in a disappearance. You don't even have to be a police officer like yourself or a guy who's covered 350 disappearances like I have to know that he goes missing the day before he was supposed to be moving to another base in a totally different state. What do you know about that? Why do you know why he was going and where was he going?
Yeah, I think he went missing the same day that he was supposed to.
Okay.
In fact, he was supposed to have left earlier the day that he
was
reported missing.
Okay.
He was supposed to be leaving Dugway at around noon or earlier on May 8th to Fort Carson, Colorado to out-process, from where he would be then reassigned to Texas at Fort Sam Houston for licensed LPN school, licensed practicing nurse school, nursing school. And he was excited for that. That was that's a huge change from Dugway Proving Grounds to Fort Sam Houston, Texas, where you're going to actually see people.
Right. Yeah, and you can go out, like there's a local town or city or whatever, and you can go out in the streets if you want, and you're off.
Yeah, go out to eat, yes, and off base. The base is close to population. So yeah, he was supposed to leave that day to Colorado, go to the airport, fly to Colorado, and then from there be reassigned to Fort Sam Houston for nursing school.
And in your work during those 2 months, as far as people you did get to talk to, of course you didn't get to talk to Brando. I don't think anybody, I would love to talk to him too, but we realize sometimes those things can't happen. But the people you talked to, you knew Joe said he was really excited to do this. He was looking forward to this.
He was, yes. Everybody that I spoke with, and then the reports that I read, and I read every report I could find.
Yeah.
Everyone but Springer said that he was happy, excited to be getting out of Dugway, looking forward to his new assignment, and looking forward to that school.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right, so once again, this is what makes this start wondering, well, what's going on here? Okay. Now, something that caught my, I've never been in the military. I'm not much of a nature person, to be honest. But I'm wondering your reaction when, I don't know who it was, maybe multiple people told you, given that we're going to get into the circumstances of this car that wasn't his, but it was left out there in the middle of nowhere outside of the base, and that's how he went missing. Did important story regarding it says that Joe and his friends would routinely go out there and get stuck in the desert. Do you remember talking to somebody about that? Does it strike you as odd being somebody from Utah yourself? Anything that maybe kind of your spidey sense goes off when you read something like that?
Well, yes and no. I would probably lean toward it's very possible to get stuck out in the desert in this area for a couple of reasons. The biggest is, like I mentioned, by the time you get out to Dugway, you're out of gas. But where they're on base, they can get gas at the base, but it's all dirt roads. These dirt roads are not marked. There's no signs. You really have to know where you're going, and roads could go every direction you could imagine out there. So it would be very easy to get turned around or take wrong turns and go a long ways in the wrong direction and finally realize it and end up getting out of gas. So I can see it totally happening in that regard. Secondary to that, if it rains out there, and it doesn't a lot, but if it does rain, just like a lot of Utah, even where I live now, similar dirt structure, but it's like clay mud.
Yeah.
And even the best four-wheel drive will get stuck.
Okay.
You will slide right off the road. You just can't get any traction until it dries.
Right. I guess what I'm also asking you, Lex, is, once again, having read the report myself, it said that they would it almost sounded to me, maybe I misread it, if you have a different interpretation, I'd certainly like to hear it, that they would almost go out there and get stuck almost like on purpose. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it seemed like it was thrown out there flippantly, like, oh yeah, we go out there and get stuck, and walk back or get a ride. But I don't know. Like you, I don't know that would happen a lot. You would think that if you lived out there and did it often, you would mitigate it somehow. But
right. So
I don't know how to take that. I know it is Utah and the weather changes at the drop of a hat. So I can see that happening.
Okay.
But I would think that it doesn't happen as much as they said it did.
Okay. Maybe a little confirmation bias. Of course, you're getting involved 10 years later. Could be just people looking back and misremembering.
Yeah. Saying, oh, yeah, well, it happened to me once, so, yeah.
Okay. Gotcha. A little anecdotal. All right, before we get into the actual disappearance and the way, it is explained in the report, what kind of paperwork did you get to see during your 2 months on the job? Did you get to see the local police reports? I mean, how much could you get your hands on during those 2 months?
Yeah, we were able to see most of what the Tooele County Sheriff's Office had written in their reports, and a lot of what the military had written or released over the years, much of which Kevin had collected and provided to us. And I sent additional grandma requests, like a FOIA request. Yeah. Is more commonly known in Utah. They call them grandma requests. But for records from Tooele Police Department, spoke with a lieutenant investigator there who remembered the case as well, just trying to see if there's anything else that wasn't provided. But we did have many pages of different reports from different military investigators, and the sheriff's office reports from Tooele County were pretty a lot focused on the search efforts, which wasn't super helpful to anything I was looking at. Okay. And their investigative follow-up more or less just said that the military's handling it.
Okay. Huh. And what kind of connection did you get? Any help from the Dugway military at all?
No, I didn't. I think we had everything that they were going to give us.
Okay.
I did not try to go onto the base to look at anything there. I didn't even feel like that would be helpful or applicable. I drove around the outside to where I could see the Ditto and Callio gate just to get a feel for how big and massive that area is and so forth.
Okay. All right. And I guess when you, like, any interaction with anybody on the base who would be responsible for trying to figure out what happened to Joe, being that he went missing, surely somebody on that base cared that he went missing. Did you ever have any interaction with that person looking into it?
No, not that I remember.
Okay.
An individual from that base. I remember hearing about that individual, and maybe I did speak to one. I don't remember.
That's all right. I guess being that you don't remember, it must not have been very enlightening, being that you barely remember it.
No, it was more or less just look at this stuff that I was already looking at.
Okay. How did before we get into the disappearance, would you say that the local police force, the county there, did not mind you? Of course, you had a lot of police experience before doing what you were doing at the time. Would you say that they were helpful? They were forthcoming?
Yeah, they certainly did not stand in my way, and they were as helpful as they could be with it. They just really didn't have a lot for me. But it certainly didn't sound or seem at all like they, didn't want me to be doing anything. They were more than happy to have somebody look at it.
Okay, very good. That's good to hear. Sometimes, as you know, once again, I realize you're in law enforcement. We know we've covered enough disappearances here. Sometimes law enforcement, when maybe a private investigator or somebody, sometimes police departments in certain areas can be very protective. They don't give out anything, and even if the FOIAs are filled out, I've gotten it many times. There's a continuing investigation, so we can't speak to the media. Things like that.
Right.
Yeah, it happens.
Yeah, and it does, but they did not step in the way, nor did it feel like they didn't want me, looking into it and making them look bad or anything like that. They said, "Yeah, here's everything we've tried. Good luck."
Okay. All right. Good luck, fella. All right.
Yeah.
Let's just go in very general terms. What allegedly happened? Let's just talk about. Let's put it this way. What is the publicly accepted story for Joe's disappearance? Okay, he's on the base. Then allegedly, what goes on? This is mainly, I guess, coming from Brandon Springer. But what is the general understanding of this disappearance? We're not saying it's correct. It's just publicly accepted.
Yeah, what's generally accepted is that sometime during the night or early morning hours of May 8th, 2011, Joe left the base driving a black Mitsubishi Lancer that belonged to a friend of his who was on deployment or assignment, and it was allowing him to use it. But he left the base, went out exploring in the mountains southwest of the Dugway base there, and at some point somehow ran out of gas, began walking back towards the base, and at about 6 o'clock that same day of May 8th, well, about 6:59 p.m., 7 o'clock p.m., made phone calls to Springer saying, "I'm stuck, it's raining, I'm freezing cold, I'm trying to walk back to the base. Here's the general area that I am. I think I need help." And then Springer went and notified command, and they began a search as soon as they could in the general area that they thought that he was missing in. It's well known there was a lot of weather at the time. It was cold, it was raining, it was horrible conditions, and that's basically it. They days later found the vehicle in kind of a remote mountain area west of the base, and started searching from there. And I think the only thing that was ever found that belonged to him outside of the vehicle was a hat.
Okay.
And that hat was found between the vehicle and the base direction, but not super far.
Okay. All right. We're going to come back to some of those things a little bit more detail in a bit. So we just want to get that first part. So he goes out the early morning of that day of May 8th, but then he doesn't call. So early morning, I don't know what, but then he doesn't call Brandon until that evening. So he's out there for like 12 hours or something before he calls for help, or did you say that right? I just want to make sure we understand that.
Yeah, so according to surveillance at the gate at Dugway,
okay,
a black vehicle matching the description, but quality is poor, is seen leaving, and it was at like 2-3 a.m. on May 8th.
Wow. Okay.
So super early.
Yeah.
And then it's not until 15 hours later that he calls, says I'm stuck or out of gas and I'm cold and I need help.
Wow. All right. So seemingly, once again, if we're to believe this car leaving the base, once again, the publicly accepted story, realize there's going to be, once again, we're going to get into some wiggle room here. But then not till 15 hours later is then Brandon Springer claiming, yeah, Joe called me and said he was lost, he was cold, he was out of gas, and he was trying to walk back to the base.
Yes.
Okay.
That is more or less the most accepted story.
All right. That's in general the accepted story. Very good. As best as you can tell, during those 15 hours that was, once again, the publicly accepted story, did anybody at the base realize that he was gone? Did anybody, other than Brandon, wonder where Joe, did that ever come up at any point in your investigation, if you can remember?
No. So strangely, it didn't, and it is kind of odd to me because according to everything I read and folks that I spoke with, Brandon Springer was supposed to drive Joe to the airport around noon on May 8th.
Right.
But no one said, hey, where's Joe? Brandon didn't say, where's Joe? Until 7 o'clock that night when he supposedly got phone calls saying he was stuck in the desert.
Okay, that is...
Being the military, if you aren't somewhere where you're supposed to be at the time you're supposed to be there, people should notice that and report that. That's sort of how it is in the military.
Right. Never been in it, but that's my dad served 2 years in the Army. He talks about it often. But of course, everybody knows that. And thank you. Yeah, right. It's just not, people can just not go on and off the base. Maybe they have permission for shore leave or whatever they call it. But you go missing for that amount of time, you'd think people would notice.
They would, especially when you miss a flight.
Right, of course. And we're going to come back to this story about Brandon as well. Regarding this and, kind of get deeper into that. Very good. All right, so Joe seemingly is at the base. He seemingly leaves in the car that he's using. The friend of his allowed him to use it. Starts driving around. The car, nobody denies where the car was found. It was out there in the middle of nowhere, quite far from the Dugway base. And he allegedly calls Brandon. But it should come to this, though. So even though, we're going to get into the story with Brandon, it was Brandon Springer, in your opinion, who initiated this and said, you know what, Joe called me, something's not right. Brandon was the first one to raise the red flag saying something's not right.
Yes.
He was. Okay. Best as you can tell, did he do this immediately, according to the public story, the official story?
Did Brandon?
Yes.
Yeah, so Singer, as soon as he got the calls, allegedly around 7 p.m., May 8th, called a sergeant and notified him, gave him the area that he supposedly was lost in, and then was asked to call back and get more specifics. So according to Springer, as soon as he got the call, Joe's saying he was freezing, walking back, and needed help, he made the notifications.
All right. So once again, publicly accepted story that this is what happened. Like I said, we'll get into the details a little bit more, but we're just going over the generalities now, listeners. Okay. And my understanding is what they did was they kind of followed what Brandon Springer said, according to what Joe said. They went up to this, the Granite Mountain area, and some others went to check Joe's room. And my understanding, you've already brought this up, but I want to mention again, and it was raining that night, that evening of that May 8th.
Yes. It was raining at least the evening time when the phone calls were made, yes.
Okay.
I don't know the weather the night prior, but...
Okay, so he's out there, and once again, nobody denies the car was found where it was found. And he allegedly was walking back to base, and it's raining out there. And just the best, being that you're from Utah, May in Utah in that area in the evening, how cold is it going to be in general?
In May in that area?
Yeah.
It's the desert. If it's not raining, it's fairly comfortable. Might make it down into the 60s.
Okay.
If it's raining, storming,
yeah,
it can get a lot colder, down into the 40s.
Okay. All right, so he's out there and not sure if he's wearing the proper clothing, and we'll get into some of the things that were in the car here eventually. Let's now move up to this. So this is how it all got started. Brandon Springer says, yeah, Joe called me, says he was in trouble. These people go out there. But it wasn't until May 14th, 2011, a few days later, when the car was found. What can you say about that? What is your understanding about the cars found and everything that went on, and the location, condition, everything?
It was in a very remote location where it was found, in an area that has roads all over it, kind of a mountainous area that I don't know that a lot of people would necessarily go to.
Okay.
And I'm just looking back right now. We mentioned the car was seen leaving the gate. It was actually seen leaving the gate at 3:54 a.m.
Okay.
on May 8th.
Okay.
So it gives you that.
Yeah.
But it was found in about 10 miles as the crow flies from where the base West Callio gate is.
Okay.
In a mountainous area where you couldn't see the base from there, but it was not, as the crow flies, super far. It was driven into a ravine and just abandoned.
Okay, was it wrecked? I guess it was out of gas? Is that what it was?
It was out of gas.
Okay. So it wasn't wrecked,
it was
just out of gas there.
Yep, it was out of gas. They were able to obtain a key, I think, from the dealer. The key wasn't with it to begin with. Key never recovered. Dealership, I think some months down the road, was able to get him a key. And they confirmed that the vehicle was indeed out of gas.
Okay. The way you understand it, once again, going off of what Brandon said and what Joe said to him, would you, in your opinion, being that you've been there, would you say what Brandon said about where Joe said he was is where the car was found, or are those two different areas, your opinion?
His story changed a little bit twice, or three. Well, it changed several times when they spoke to him. Generally speaking, it's accurate, but it seemed as though every time Springer was interviewed, he added a little bit more detail or recalled a little bit more, and kind of began narrowing that area toward where the vehicle was found. Now, the individuals that found it are completely unrelated to anything with the case, but.
And how was the car eventually found? Maybe we should go through that. How was it found? Was it found by some of these military people or searchers searching for it, or was it found like by accident?
I want to say it was just found by a couple of civilians who were out there exploring and driving through that kind of hilly mountainous area.
Wow.
when they found it, they contacted law enforcement, who ran the plate and realized that it was linked to a missing person.
Wow. Okay. All right, so it's out there. It's not wrecked. It's been some disappearances recently that come to mind. People driving off into the desert, and then I think there's a disappearance in Arizona where a young man drove off and his Jeep was found upside down in a very small ravine. He's still missing, so this is kind of what we think of, but not with this car. It was just parked there, ran out of gas on this very, very remote road. Just in general, the way you remember it, anything unusual about it, anything that, once again, you as an investigator with all your police experience, anything that maybe caught your eye in reading the reports on it.
On where the vehicle was?
Yeah, no, just anything about it, just the exterior of it, the interior of it, the condition of it, anything, a flat tire, anything else like that.
No, nothing stood out, especially to me, other than it sounds like there was a lot of equipment left in the trunk that would have been very useful to somebody trying to walk back to the base, especially in those weather conditions. And somebody like Joe would have known that it was there because he was borrowing the vehicle, and he would have known how to utilize it, and he wouldn't have left it behind.
Okay. All right, so could have been Joe left. Joe could have left it there, but there's certainly no facts to support that he did. Somebody else could have left it there. No facts to support somebody else did.
Yeah. I mean, it could have been left by anyone. As we looked into it further, and we could talk about a TomTom GPS, I think there's a chance it got left there by somebody else.
Okay, we're certainly going to come to that TomTom. And TomTom, if you're wondering, it's like a Garmin going back to technology of 13 years ago. Seems space age now, not so much now, but it's a GPS device.
Yes.
All right, we're going to get to the GPS. I'll just call it the GPS device here in a little bit. Anything regarding the vicinity of his car? Any footprints? Any signs of violence? Any other tire tracks? Anything like that you read in any of the reports?
No. It sounded like it had been very rainy for quite a while after the vehicle had been abandoned, so there was really no remaining tracks. They didn't find any footprints. No signs of violence that I remember reading about or seeing. I don't believe they had any other tire tracks. There was just nothing really to go by at the vehicle.
Okay, very good. So you just have this car sitting out there. Luckily, it was found, but nothing really that points us in any particular direction. We're going to come back to people probably. Well, what about fingerprints? We're going to come back to that a little later. All right. You've been there. Please, once again, describe the area where this car was. Could he have kept driving further? Did the road continue, or did it look like the car just stopped right there in the middle of this very, very remote road?
So it is a spider web of little dirt roads out there in this kind of mountainous area in the desert. There are a lot of old mine shafts, so there are a lot of 2-track roads cutting off of bigger roads that continue to kind of spider web out or vein out into smaller roads, and you could take almost endless turns and twists, and sometimes they dead end and you go back and take another. There's no rhyme or reason to why someone would have ended up exactly where he was. 'Cause it's just kind of in the middle. It's called Kelly's Hole. It's not pretty. It's just kind of orange, red rock, not even orange, kind of burnt copper rock, some sagebrush, a few cedar trees, and dirt. And then some old mines. But it's not like it's a destination area to go hike.
Okay. All right. Since you've been there and I haven't I haven't been there, so thank you for doing that. As far as what you understand about searches that were done, how many, how extensive, and then we're going to talk about this hat. What is your understanding about searches that were done?
I understood that there were several coordinated by the Army. Then they also coordinated with search and rescue with Tooele County Sheriff's Office. They utilized drones unmanned aircraft, helicopters, horseback, and continued them for weeks and even months through that summer. And there were folks that went back and searched afterward on their own. The military, I think, listed their total man hours of searches in like the, I could try to find it, but it was, 2,058 man hours.
Wow. That sounds like a lot.
Yeah, I think that's a decent amount of time searching. And
Sure.
It's what's strange about the area is there are a lot of ups and downs, ravines, places where you could disappear if it's raining really hard. Flash flooding in that area is common. Stuff could just be moved, washed, blown away. There's not a lot to keep things in one place out there. So it makes it a challenging area to search, even though it kind of seems open. It's not once you get off the road and walk around.
Now I'm guessing, given the call, that they searched directly from the car going back to the base, and that is, you already mentioned it, we'll talk about it now, this hat. In your opinion, has this conclusively been proven to be Joe's hat, or is there still the possibility that it's somebody else's hat?
I can't remember that it's been conclusively proven, but I felt like Kevin thought it was his hat.
Okay.
If I recall that correctly, that was something they said that it was his home state and it was a hat that he wore.
Okay. Yeah. So what are the coincidence that a hat where Joe is from ends up in the desert and it's not his?
It would seem unlikely. Yes.
Right. That's right. Okay. All right, so we've gone through the generalities. We've gone through the disappearance itself, talk about the finding of the car, talk about the searches, anything unusual, footprints, other tire tracks. As Lex explained, there was weather going on there, rain, which would quickly wash anything like that away, but we still try to talk about it. And so now what we come to is, of course, he's missing. They find this hat. Of course, that's why we're here. Joe was never found. And so we're going to get into a few of things a little more deeply now. And we'll start with this. Given that you were in law enforcement, what was your perception? Was there good coordination between the Dugway military police and local police? Good, bad? I know that you know that Kevin has his own ideas, but your own ideas about coordination between Dugway and the local police, as best as you could tell from the paperwork.
From the paperwork, it seemed like they coordinated the search efforts fairly well.
Okay.
The investigative side of it, it doesn't, to me, seem that they coordinated that very well. Because of the mixed jurisdictional boundaries. Did he go missing from the base, or is he missing from where the vehicle was found that wasn't on the base? It's in Tooele County. So there was, I guess, maybe not the best coordination in that regard.
Okay.
But it did seem like they coordinated fairly well in them searching.
I just give you, maybe for instance, in your own work, if you ran across a situation like this where I don't think there's a military base in your jurisdiction, but if you were to run across something like this, what would be your expectations of the military police or whoever would get into something like this in contrast to what do you think their expectations would be of you?
Well, I think we would share any pertinent information regarding life and safety, and that takes priority over anything else. If it's a missing person, I would expect them to share anything that would help us, and we would share anything that would help them. Frankly, the way that we do it, and in the best case scenario, we would have a joint command post where members of the military and members of law enforcement who are running the search efforts would be in the same place, coordinating everything, person to person, and doing everything we could to cover every base that we possibly could. So,
okay. Thank you for sharing that. I know it's a very hypothetical question. All right, let's move on to this. We've already talked about it, but early on we said, of course, this car was not Joe's. And your understanding, the fact is that he was just maintaining it for somebody else while that person was overseas or something. So this is actually somebody else's car.
Yeah, there was somebody else's, another friend of his from Dugway who left it there, and Joe had been driving it, had permission to drive it, but according to Kevin and other reports there too, he knew about the equipment that was in the trunk of it because he'd been driving it.
Okay. And do you know, did you ever have an opportunity to speak to the owner of the car while you were working on it for 2 months? Is that something that crossed your mind? Did you think that might be helpful, not helpful?
I never got an opportunity to talk to the individual. It was on my list. He was not super high at the top of it. I wanted to talk to other folks before that, but yeah, I would have loved to talk to them, just make sure that, did they tell him that there was the equipment in the trunk? I just can't imagine, because he'd been driving it for a couple of months, that he didn't know the equipment was in the trunk. And it does say that he knew, and that he was told that it was in there.
Okay. All right. So we don't know. So to this day in 2024, we don't know what this person's attitude is toward Joe's disappearance. If this person has his own ideas, his own theories, anything like that, we don't know.
Yeah, I don't know what his thoughts would be.
Okay. Moving on to this, once again, the car, and I mentioned it a few minutes ago, we'll talk about it now. My understanding, and once again, my biggest understanding is reading from your own report, no fingerprints in the car. Is that the way you remember it as well, Lex?
Yeah, no fingerprints in the car or on anything found in the car that was usable.
Huh. I'm gonna, of course, that's gonna catch anybody's attention. I'm guessing you had some time to think about that. Maybe talk to Kevin about that. Maybe talk to the police about that. Anybody offer any insight on it? Anybody think it's suspicious, or is this just one of those things?
Well, I'll play devil's advocate, I guess.
Go ahead.
I've recovered a lot of stolen vehicles, something that I enjoy doing, and in our gang unit times, those came up all the time, and it's more difficult than people think to find a good surface in a vehicle to find fingerprints.
Huh.
But there are surfaces on occasion where you can, rear view mirror if they adjusted it, especially if it's not their car, depending on what the gear shift knob looks like. Did they have a cup in there? A lot of surface area in cars isn't smooth. It's got some kind of texture to it.
Yeah.
So it can be difficult. And that's, but, do you grab the handle to open it? Is that smooth? Would you leave it on the inside door handle if you opened it, on the window? I don't know. So I've seen prints found in them. I've seen no prints pulled out of them. So it's hard to say, really. I mean, like I said, I'll play devil's advocate on it.
Okay.
I've had bad luck myself finding any prints inside of a vehicle, and then on others I have. More often you find it on property that's in the vehicle. Drink cups, cell phones, something with smooth surfaces you'll find.
Right. Okay. So everybody should be clear. As far as the reports say, at least the police reports that Lex has gotten to see, no fingerprints in the car. Let's move on to the TomTom, this GPS device. I'll just let you explain it. First of all, do you know, is this Joe's device or was the owner of the car's device? Do we even know?
I would have to dig into the report a little bit more, but I believe I think it was Joe's device.
Okay. All right.
That's my recollection.
Okay. So what did this GPS device say? It seemed like, the way I read it in your report, somebody looked like they were headed back to the base, but then went off on a tangent, and that's where the car ended up. How would you explain it the way you remember it?
Yeah, it was strange. So again, the black vehicle seen leaving the base at 3:54 a.m. on May 8th could have been the car, right? But in us going back and pulling data out of this TomTom device, it does show that when it was activated at 10:30 p.m. on May 7th.
Huh.
And it had activated at least 50 to 60 miles southwest of the main gate of Dugway on its way back toward Dugway. But when it got closer to Dugway, it suddenly took a left-hand turn and drove 20 miles up into the mountains, sat stationary for 5 hours, and then was driven into a ravine and abandoned. The vehicle was driven into a ravine and abandoned at that point. The TomTom then stayed active until about 2 in the morning when it shut off, which could have been either turned off by hand or maybe it just turned itself off.
Okay.
But fairly interesting, and I guess there's a lot of ways you could play devil's advocate with it. Were the times correct on it based on that, when it occurred then? Is it set for East Coast, West Coast, Mountain Time? There's some variables in it, but the directions, I think, are accurate.
Okay, so this device was not turned on seemingly when the car left the base. It was turned on at some other time. If we're to believe that car on the video, it was the car Joe was driving.
Yeah.
Okay.
Kind of looking deeper in to my notes. So it was at 10:18 p.m. on May 7th. It's 50 miles southwest of the East Main Dugway Gate on the Simpson Springs Callio Road, which is a main road. But then it takes a sudden turn 1.5 miles after being turned on, and that has it driving north, northeast, west, southwest continuously for another 20 miles, just kind of circling around in those mountains, coming to rest in the area of Kelly's Hole in the Dugway Mountains. And then it stays active at the same location until about 2 a.m. on May 8th when it shuts down. So was it turned off? Did it shut down automatically? Not certain, but when it was recovered, it powered on just fine, so the batteries didn't die.
All right, so what we're saying is that when it came on the night before, 10-something on May 7th, the car was quite a ways from the base.
Yes.
All right.
Back to the base.
Right. And so how do we, sync that up with a car seemingly being seen leaving the base then like 5 hours later?
That's a very good question.
It's hard. It's hard to put that all together, right?
Yes, and the fact is the vehicle seen leaving the base many hours later was not clear enough for them to identify it actually as, conclusively as this vehicle, as this Mitsubishi Lancer.
Okay. So there is something, though, that came out, although it's not in your report, but it is something that I think that Joe's father, Kevin, has said, is where was eventually this GPS, this TomTom found?
Yeah, I believe Kevin notified or told me that it was found in his vehicle, Kevin's vehicle, sometime later, and may have been with property given to him by the military, property belonging to his son, Joe.
Huh. All right. So they gave it back to him, didn't want to keep that for evidence.
Or, they either didn't recognize what it was wasn't in the car originally and was found back in the room with his property. I don't know. There's a lot of different theories that you could try to believe on that.
Okay. Yes, and and as we stated off the record, Kevin had told me something about it, but it's not in your report, so I hesitate to put it on the record. All we know is that the investigators did not keep this GPS device.
No, they apparently did not.
Okay.
They gave it back to him.
Okay. One more thing about the car. Is it true that on the passenger seat of this car that was not Joe's were his divorce papers?
Yes. It was kind of odd, the items that were found in there, but divorce papers, a prescription bottle that belonged to Joe, and trying to find it in my notes, but
that's fine. We can just stick with the divorce papers. The divorce papers were sitting there right there on the passenger seat.
Yeah. I don't know why they would be in there.
But that was in the report. Once again, it's in your report, and I guess that means then it was in the police report for the county.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it was found in the vehicle when they searched the inside of the vehicle, along with prescription bottle belonging to him, so it had his name on it.
Okay.
So yeah, those items, you know, to anyone looking into the case say, oh well, obviously it was his iPod, an Apple iPod, divorce paperwork, a bottle of prescription medication for Joseph. Those are in the car on the passenger seat. So obviously Joseph drove the car here. Right.
And it might also maybe point a picture of, was he depressed or something? Not saying, we're not speculating here or anything, but, what's he doing with his divorce papers sitting there on the passenger seat?
Yeah, and a bottle of medication.
Right.
Which I don't know what the medication was, so I can't speculate as to that. But it gives you. It could be a couple of things, right? It could be that he was depressed and was out there because of that. It could also be that maybe somebody was setting the stage to make it really apparent that it was Joe driving it. Because look, there's his divorce papers and there's his iPod and there's his medications on that seat.
Okay. Now, speaking of the divorce, you write about his ex-wife in your report, and I don't know if I don't know if we're to believe her or not, but she didn't paint the greatest picture of Joe's mental state.
No, she did say that she left him because of alcohol and prescription pill abuse, prescription medication abuse. When asked if she thought he was suicidal, she had said that he had talked about it, but she never really took it seriously. So that's kind of a common theme, as Joe had been depressed, but seemed to be in a better mood because he was leaving Dugway.
Yeah.
Again, he had major life trauma about a year prior to this. That's, I would imagine, contributes to your mental state. But yeah, so that's why she did say that final divorce was final March 15th. So this is 2 months later. It's not like it was brand new news to him.
Right.
But,
okay, all right. So he's right. You'd think that would be something that would be in his files back at the base, but nope, they're in the car. Of course, somebody could have put them there. Let's move on to this. Joe's room. Anything unusual about it? Of course, it was he was supposed to be moving. Did it look like he was preparing to move?
Yeah, I mean, from what I remember in reading the reports, he had picked up some boxes from people that night, that all of his stuff was sort of laid out in his room, like he was getting ready to pack it up. He had firearms that belonged to him that were just laid out and ready to go, and didn't seem like he would just leave them that way and not come back. It looked like he was preparing to leave, and then got distracted and left what he was doing.
Okay. I also read that all his guns were there. No guns that, of course, I guess I don't know if you can have personal guns on the base or not, but there were guns there, and they were all there.
Yeah, you can have them. Obviously, there's paperwork and hoops to jump through, but he had all the paperwork in order and was able to have them there. But nothing was missing, basically, from his apartment, and it looked like to everybody that he was getting his stuff out, piled on beds, on surfaces in his front room, getting ready to pack it all up.
Okay. Now, there is a female civilian. I don't know if her name is in your report or not, but she had this story about Ambien.
Yes.
Do you remember that? What is that story?
Yeah. She was someone he knew from the base that she had asked him to check on her place, I think, while she was gone. He was going to let her dogs out, and this was on May 4th or 5th. She said that he stole a bottle of about 20 to 25 Ambien pills.
Wow.
But waited until after, a few days afterward, on May 11th, to report that he had done that.
Okay. That's concerning, but that's the story she came forward with after he went missing.
Yes, and that would be something I would have wanted to follow up on, as who she was, because she's not listed in there. She's just a female civilian EMS employee, and she had dogs, and I would imagine, you'd be able to figure out who that was.
Right. Okay, that's not a good story, and once again, she could be lying. Who knows? But that came out.
Yeah, that did come out, and somebody on Ambien, I mean, we all heard the stories, but can absolutely get confused and end up doing strange things.
Yep. Okay. Let's move on to a guy we talked about. I haven't talked about him in a while. Brandon Springer, kind of centers all around him. You've already stated he's the one that allegedly got these calls. You've also stated that it seems the more he was questioned, the more he added to his story, which is always concerning. We've already established that even though you wanted to talk to him, your assignment on this ran out before that could happen. You're working on for 2 months, never happened an opportunity to do that. Very well that maybe that Brandon would have spoken to you. I guess we'll never know. But Brandon did claim, seemingly, that he believed he was the last person to see Joe. Not just the last person who got a call from Joe, but the last person that saw Joe on the base.
Yeah, he claimed that he had him over for dinner that night with him and his fiance. Huh. And he had had a couple of drinks, but wasn't drunk. Went back home to pack more, and then supposedly came back over later in the house in the evening and seemed more intoxicated. Mm-hmm. And then, the phone calls that he supposedly got the next day,
right,
are suspect as well.
Okay. All right, so he's saying the night before Joe was to leave the base, they got together for dinner, just the three of them, Brandon, the woman in his life, and Joe.
Yes.
All right, so is this like a house, or do you even know what kind of place they're talking? Are there houses on the base, or is this off the base? Do you even know?
All the houses out there are on the base, and this is the little community where they all lived. I don't know if it's kind of like apartment complexes from what I've seen, or duplexes and fourplexes. I don't know how close to each other they live, but walking distance in the same little area.
Okay, so this is all on the base. Everybody, we're talking, all of this is on the base. Now, we also talked about this. Please.
I was going to say, do we want to talk about the woman in Brandon's life.
We're going to get to that. We're going to get to that. We're going to get to that in a moment. I just want to establish this first.
Gotcha.
It seems to me that there are conflicting stories as to Brandon and Joe, and were they frenemies, full-on enemies, friends, a little bit of everything? Ever able to determine that? What did you hear about regarding that?
I never was able to confirm one way or the other, but from most of the people that I spoke to or reports that I read, they weren't necessarily friends. And Springer had just been assigned to drive him to the airport at noon on the 8th. Perhaps they had made up or were doing better at the end, but it sounded like they never were necessarily tight friends.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a reason for that, I think.
Yeah, why don't you tell everybody about it right now? What is the connection between Joe and Brandon?
So Brandon was engaged to a woman who Joe had dated and had been sleeping with up until right before she got with Brandon.
Wow. Has anybody ever been able to fill you in as to how that she all went from Joe to Brandon? Do we know what happened there? How long was that before this disappearance occurred?
No one was ever able to fill that in for me, and I don't know how well that was looked into by anyone on the base or at the investigators. There's not a lot of reference made to it. But supposedly they had stayed in contact quite regularly, Joe and the woman that Brandon was engaged to, which could have been causing issues. Or been the source of frustration between them and made Brandon not like him. There's even allegation that Joe called her directly the day that he supposedly went over there for dinner as well that evening.
Huh. That is unique. The three of them get together even though she used to be with Joe, and this is the night before Joe is leaving the base.
Yes.
And allegedly, Brandon is the one who's going to take him to the airport.
Yeah, supposed to take him into airport noon on May 8th.
May 8th, all right. Do you know if Brandon and this woman ended up getting married? Do you know?
I don't know, and that's why I didn't really want to. I know her first name, but I don't want to throw it out there. I don't know if they ended up married. I don't know what ended up happening there.
Okay.
So, and I didn't know how to find her unless they were married. Then I probably could have found her.
All right. Would you would have questioned her if you'd had more time? You would have questioned her, certainly.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. Let's move on to this. Now we have to keep this simple because we have to remember this is an audio program. We can't do like a diagram for all these timeline calls and everything else. So we need to keep this simple. But let's just go back to what was Brandon's general story about the calls that Joe made to him.
Yeah, he said, and military time's easier for me, but at 6:59 p.m. on May 8th, he missed a phone call from Joe Bushling.
Okay.
His phone was on vibrate, he said. But then he saw he had missed the call, listened to the message. He saw that he missed a call and was left a voicemail. He didn't listen to the voicemail. He just called back. And he says he started the conversation by asking him how Fort Carson was, which is interesting because he was supposed to have been to the airport
right
earlier that day.
Okay.
He would know if he was at Fort Carson or not. And that is another thing I really wish I would have been able to confirm or had confirmed by somebody in a position of command over these two was Springer really assigned to take him to the airport?
Right. Yeah, we're gonna get to that in a moment. But as far as the calls go,
call So he misses the call, sees that he missed it, calls back, says, asks him about Fort Carson. Bushling said he's not there. He's out by West Granite. His car ran out of gas. He's cold and sounded confused. And it's raining really hard. He needs him to come pick him up because he doesn't have shoes. And that he was using his shirt as footwear.
Wow.
And then it comes out later in another conversation that a cave all of a sudden is mentioned that, he said he may have lost his shoes in the cave.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why he was wearing his shirt on his feet. But the first times he's interviewed, there's very little information. And then the subsequent times that he's interviewed, he just adds more and more narrative to it. And like the guy's really thanking him, and I know I'm in trouble, but please help me. So Springer talks to Bushling, Joe, real fast, hangs up, calls the sergeant. Sergeant says, find out more details. We'll get some people together to go look and try to find him. The gate is closed at that area, so we're going to contact security, such and such. So the sergeant starts putting stuff in motion. And then he calls back and is not able to get a hold of him.
Okay.
He called back and got him to answer once, and he asked, so he called the sergeant. Sergeant said, call him back, get more info. He didn't call back. He says Bushling sounds more confused and reiterating the fact that he was cold. It sounded like he was shivering. He could hear rain. And all he would say that it was west of Granite and that it was really cold. And he told them that he would, they were coming to get him and he'd have to call security and so forth to get him out there. And then that's that. He tries to call back again and has no more contact after 7:06 p.m.
On May 8th.
Can't get a hold of him. Phone doesn't work. 7:06 p.m. on May 8th.
Okay.
No more contact. Didn't sound like his phone was dying, or he never mentioned that his phone was dying. Sounded like he was outside because he could hear rain, but the phone never worked again.
Okay. Now, he says that Joe left a message. However, has anybody ever heard this message?
No one has ever heard it that I know of. It's not written of, and in one of the reports it says it was deleted.
Wow. All right, so we only have Brandon's word saying that Joe left him a message.
Correct. That's all we have on any of those phone calls having occurred, really, is his word.
Okay, regarding the call records, once again, we're trying to keep this as simple as possible. In general, your opinion, do the call records, if you've seen them, or at least what the police have said about them, the call records, do they match up with the story that Brandon tells about one call, then two calls, and calling him back, whatever the sequence was? Do the records match up with that, or do they show something different?
They don't match up with that. They don't show that any phone calls were made from or to Bushling's phone at all on the 8th.
Huh.
The last calls were on the 7th. There were some text messages sent on the 8th. But initially in the reports from AT&T that it says that blank information on May 8th, and AT&T said that there were no data or messages because the phone was either out of range or turned off. But in the military report, they say that Springer made contact at 1859, 1900, and again at 1906. So about 7 p.m. on May 8th. But AT&T records don't match up.
And once again, you never got to question him. In what you saw of the police, did the police ever question him about that, challenge him on that, or not?
No, I don't see anywhere where somebody called him out on that and said, how come we have no record of any of these phone calls happening? I also don't see where anybody challenged him on why didn't you drive him to the airport at noon and why did it take until 7 p.m. to say anything?
Right. It is interesting. So, didn't question about the call records, and we're going to get to the airport trip in a moment. Nobody heard this message, at least nobody that we know of. He didn't save it. You would think in the paperwork that you got to see, if the police got to listen to it, that they would have mentioned it and see if it matched up with what Brandon said. Doesn't seem like that was done. And didn't Brandon say maybe he deleted it?
Yeah, he said he deleted it, or that he did say he deleted it, actually.
Okay. What about phone pings? Helpful at all? Was that done? Being that Joe said he was in a particular location, if the pings were gotten, would they confirm that location or not?
No, it wouldn't necessarily. It would show which tower they bounced off of, and they did find that. I mean, almost all the calls out there go off the Cedar Mountain cell tower area, which just gives you like 20 square miles of area to search is all. It doesn't really triangulate you unless it's an active phone call and you can do more work with it. So no, it doesn't help really.
Okay. All right, so not any help. So these phone records seem to not match up with what Brandon said. Maybe he's misremembering or something. Maybe his memory's getting clouded. It's not unusual. Maybe he felt stressed or something. We don't know. But you're the one who worked on this for 2 months. And this doesn't seem like they totally match up with what he said. However, as you've already stated, the investigators themselves never actually asked him about it.
No.
Wow.
They did not.
Okay. Now we move on to something that we've mentioned maybe already 5 times over this. So far, we're about an hour and a half into this, over this hour and a half interview. Something that, we can talk about phone pings, and we can talk about Brandon's fiance being Joe's former girlfriend, on and on and on. But this is probably the thing, I will tell you, this is probably the thing that caught my attention when I came across Joe's disappearance, and it has to do with him leaving the base. And the claim is this, that it was actually Brandon himself who was supposed to drive Joe to the airport on May 8th. And I'll just get into this for a moment. So Joe seemingly goes missing from the base early morning, May 8th of 2011. 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning, somewhere in there. He is due to take a commercial flight, not a military flight, I don't think, but a commercial flight, from there to, I guess, Colorado, because he was moving to another base, we already talked in the medical field, in Texas. And Brandon is the one who was supposed to drive him to the airport. But seemingly, Brandon, he's never brought it up, never made any effort that morning, maybe 10 a.m. or whatever, to go find Joe to see, hey, I'm supposed to drive to the airport. It's seemingly the case that Brandon never did this. And, of course, we already know. They didn't have any contact until allegedly that evening when Joe called Brandon. This is the thing that really, really caught my attention regarding all of this. But here's the thing, Lex. I think we need to be very important on this. First of all, is this drive to the airport ever mentioned in any of the police paperwork you saw?
No.
Okay. So then, asking you just your work on it for 2 months, how did you hear about this, about Brandon allegedly being the assignment of driving Joe to the airport that day? Do you remember how you found out about that?
I believe I was told by Kevin, his father.
Okay. And any idea, once again, I had a very short conversation with him some months ago. You had longer conversations with him. Did Kevin, if you can remember, did Kevin ever say where he got that piece of information from? Does it anything ring a bell at all?
If I remember right, and it's been a couple of years,
It certainly has.
I want to say that he mentioned he was told that by some other soldiers that were friends of Joe's, because they thought it was kind of interesting that he would be assigned because they didn't get along.
Right, and we've established that. That's right. So there's this, are they friends? Are they enemies? Are they somewhere in between? But although I've not been in the military, that would not really mean anything, right, Lex? I mean, if you're assigned to go do something for somebody, it doesn't matter if you get along with that person or not, right?
Yeah. Your job is to salute and execute. You
Right.
do it, yeah.
That's right. You're saluting the rank, not the man, as they said in Band of Brothers, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. You just do it. That's an order, and you follow orders. It's
Okay.
like law enforcement. Doesn't matter if you get along with them. That is your job.
Okay. All right, so we have this story, and I'm not saying that Kevin is lying or anything else. It's just, I think for all of us, everybody listening, and I have to remember it from my analysis of the disappearance, and I'm sure Lex has been thinking about it since he worked on the case in 2021, is that it's not mentioned anywhere, even though it would seem that the police would have known that if Kevin told them or something, and I'm wondering how Kevin would even know that. But this is what Kevin said, that he learned that it was actually Brandon that was supposed to take Joe to the airport, and seemingly Brandon never tried to hunt down Joe that day.
Yeah. It seems like that would be the first thing that people would look into, right?
You'd think.
Who was supposed to take them to the airport, and where is that person? Hey, why didn't he get to the airport? But I don't see that talked about anywhere at all. And I don't see it talked about anywhere at all with any person assigned to it.
Right.
That seems odd, right? There should be
Yeah.
so-and-so going to drive him to the airport. At this time, he didn't show up. That's when they should have started searching, I think.
Yeah.
Or at least wondered where he is. He just missed his flight. What's
He
going
did.
on?
Right.
So there's a big old gap in what the heck is going on right there.
Okay. Being that you had the police reports, did you ever talk to anyone at the county sheriff's the county sheriff's office about this particular point?
No, I never got to get into this, and I don't know that they knew this part. I wish I still had access to these to dig back through, but I don't remember anywhere seeing the exact information about that flight and who was supposed to take him. I just remember it was supposed to be a commercial and it was supposed to be around noon that day.
Huh. Do you even remember, I know this is maybe something a little off track, but when it comes to rank, were Joe and Brandon the same rank? Was one above the other? Do you even remember?
I don't ever remember seeing Springer's rank, but the impression I get is they were the same, or very close in rank, because they both kind of had the same supervisor.
Okay. So I guess what we're saying here is it might be unusual for somebody of a higher rank to drive somebody of a lower rank to the airport, but the opposite would seem to make more sense, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, and if they're the similar rank and they're, their sergeant is supposedly the one that made the assignment, and you just do what you're told.
Okay. All right. Once again, though, the sergeant in all the paperwork that you've seen was never asked about this. In fact, in your whole report, and it's a spectacular report, it's a long report, that's never mentioned either. Whether the supervisor or the commanding officer, the next person in rank, was ever asked about this either.
Yeah, that's not anywhere.
Wow.
But I was told that
Yeah.
that individual might be willing to talk, but I don't know why in none of the reports he was asked about that either.
Okay. That is a stumper. All right, let's just go to this now regarding Brandon Springer. Did anybody, try to back up his story? Anybody able to establish his alibi? Of course, he says he was with Joe and his fiancée on that late evening of the day before. Was that ever done during the investigation to even establish where Brandon and his fiancée were that evening or into the next day? Anything you saw?
No, I never saw an interview with the fiancée to confirm what Brandon said. I never saw any interviews with anyone else talking about, did you see Brandon and Joe together? Can you confirm he was there having dinner that night? And and that's interesting. The fiance not being interviewed to confirm that he was there that night, also to ask, because everyone else who's interviewed says Joe was in a high spirits, in a good mood, excited to get the heck away from Dugway and go to this new school in Texas. Everyone says he was in good spirits. He wasn't depressed.
Yeah.
But the springer paints a picture of Joe being very depressed. He comes over for dinner, he's drinking before that, and he says he's going home to pack. And then he comes over to check on him and finds him looking at a book, a family photo album, and that he's highly drunk and intoxicated at that point.
Okay.
So, but he's the only one that says that Joe's depressed at that time frame.
Okay. And he's seemingly a guy who, he sees Joe more than maybe Joe's family does and everything. But on the other hand, we just don't know, if he's telling the truth about this depression or not. Did he know Joe well enough to even determine this?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how well they knew each other. From all, accounts that I've seen, they weren't tight friends.
Okay.
And other people who were friends and had talked to him recently said that he had been depressed, and he especially had been saddened by the passing of a family member. But got his spirits more recently had been up, that he was looking forward to this move, and he was doing much better.
Okay. Yeah, on the base, this is probably something I should have asked you a little while ago, but your understanding of Joe's living situation on the base, did he have his own? Of course, it seems like Brandon and his fiancée had like a house. I'm guessing, being that Joe was just by himself, he didn't have a house. Was he in the barracks? Did he have his own room, or what was the situation?
I think he had an apartment, in an apartment complex.
Okay.
I don't know how many apartments there were, but there's a name for that little housing unit that he lived in. It was just a one-person apartment. Okay.
And so he was just living by himself?
Yeah, he lived alone in that apartment.
Okay. Do we ever hear of anybody, of course, this is kind of like, I don't know if you know the disappearance, Lex, but of Mara Murray, who went missing back in the mid-2000s from New Hampshire, and she was a student at UMass, and her stuff was kind of packed. There's different interpretations of it, but her room at UMass, things were kind of stacked in boxes and everything else. And every time I hear about Joe's stuff, I kind of think of the same thing. Her disappearance is still unsolved. Anybody ever come forward to say when Joe was actually doing that packing, or anybody helped him or seen him, anything like that, any of the paperwork that you saw?
I remember hearing about him borrowing boxes from somebody to pack, and them saying he was in good spirits.
Okay. All good spirits except for one person.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm not familiar with that other case, but it's interesting.
You know that one?
No, I don't.
Oh, you don't? Okay. When you in your spare time, when you're not catching bad guys out there in Utah, you can maybe check. It's one of the, as far as the true crime community goes, has to be the most well-known disappearance in the United States in the 21st century of a regular person, of your average person on the street. So you can check that out. It does have some similarities to this. Once again, somebody leaving a room, leaving it somewhat, things in boxes and everything, and her car was eventually found in New Hampshire, a couple hours away, after she had wrecked, seemingly, and never been found again. That's coming up. We're getting close to the 20-year anniversary on that. Mara Murray is her name. Let's move on to this, and if you want to say, you can. If you don't want to say, you don't have to. I'm not putting you on the spot. I think you've done a fantastic job so far in this interview, Lex, so I don't want to try to paint you into a corner on this. But in the report, towards the end, and I think I don't think this is something you chose to do. I'm guessing maybe it was an expectation. It was a requirement of the work that you did 3 years ago. You did come to a conclusion. I mean, you certainly pointed out some of the flaws of the investigation, many of which we discussed in this interview, but you did come to a particular opinion. Would you like to talk about that now, or what?
Yeah, as far as theories, case
theories. Yeah, you made an assessment. You are an experienced investigator, 20 years at that point in law enforcement work. You're very educated, very professional. You looked at it and you came to a particular conclusion. What did you have to say about it?
I have a lot of questions, and the person to me that has the only motive and opportunity to, if there's foul play, to have been the person to make Joe disappear was Bradley Springer. His descriptions of Joe's personality that night, his mood, everything else don't match with many other people who spoke with him. Mm-hmm. It was kind of widely known around there, kind of secret but not a secret, that possibly Bushling was still sleeping with Springer's fiance.
Huh.
That could certainly be something that would push somebody over the edge, especially when that individual is leaving the next day. So the phone calls that he claims were made the evening of May 8th, there's no record of them anywhere on any of the phone records that they got, and no one was able to listen to that voicemail, which to me would be a very important voicemail to save if I had it, that would show that I was innocent. The guy that's missing called me at 7 p.m. after he should have been on his flight and left me a voicemail. This is his voice. He's very much alive and well here, but I deleted it. Those all just are really, really strange behaviors or strange things that should have been looked into a little bit more. And I mean, I could go on. It just, to me, there just needed to be more work done on Springer. I'm not saying that he did it, but gosh, there sure were a lot of questions that weren't asked that should have been. And there were a lot more motive and opportunity for him than anyone else. And no one really went down that road with him.
Nope. Any idea why? Once again, you're the police officer. You kind of can be in other police officers' heads on these things. Any insight into that? Any at all?
No, and I wasn't in the military either, and I can't say if it had anything to do with that at all. But the vibe I get from reading interviews, the interviews are always short and sweet, stick to the facts. Were you allowed to take breaks? Were you allowed to get a drink? Like, they're covering their bases, but they're not really digging in. Yeah. It's interesting interview tactics. No true interview interrogation going on at all. And very non-confrontational, super short. Reiterate what you told us before. Okay. Did we treat you good? Okay, bye. No hard questions, none. Never an ask about why he wasn't on the plane. Did you have dinner with him the night before, as you claimed? Did this and that happen? None of those questions happened. And I think, like we talked about right out the gate, sometimes police officers, I would imagine military investigators, get a lot of, well, this guy went AWOL for a couple of days and went to Vegas. He's going to come back, so we're just crossing T's, dotting I's here. No big deal, right? So they don't dig in. It's just another routine call, and they approach it from that mentality rather than, let's start at worst case scenario and then eliminate that and work back to where, okay, hopefully we find him in Vegas. So I think it just was approached in a nonchalant way, and no one really had on their mind at all that there could possibly have been foul play.
Okay.
That was the vibe I got from it. No one really suspected foul play at all, ever. From the beginning. It was just a missing person. everybody focused on those facts, and nobody looked back and said, wait a minute, he shouldn't even have been out here. And that's the guy's the only one who saw him, and start asking some hard questions.
Right. Right. And I guess what we're saying here, circumstantially, there are things that don't seem to make sense. On the other hand, there's really no facts to get in the way of the idea that, that Joe really was out there and tried walking back and lost his hat right there in the high desert and trying to walk back.
Yeah.
Circumstantially, once again, I realize what Brandon said about the calls and things, but we can't necessarily prove, on the other hand, that anybody else parked the car there, for example.
No, we can't prove either way, and there's definitely there's some evidence to show that happened. There's also, if you take the cynical or view, there's planted evidence to make it look like he went missing there, and then they knew that he always wore that razorback hat and walked the direction of the base, and then tossed that in the bushes. That's something to find, and it definitely could be both. Could be either. I mean, it could be one or the other. It can't be both. But there's enough mystery that it could just be a missing person. It also could be much worse.
Okay. And of course, as the listeners don't realize already, of course, Joe's family completely believes that there was foul play involved. And I'll just keep it very, very general. Kevin, as everybody would suspect, is even way, 1,000, 1,000,000 times more critical of the investigation that was done than Lex is. Lex has questions. He said, if I would have been there, you'd hope that these questions would be asked. He wasn't there. Kevin goes way further than that, and I'll just leave it at that. So they, to the point that, of course, I think it's really damaged Kevin and the rest of Joe's family quite a bit. Because I think, I got the feeling, Lex, once again, it seems this is a family that at least had a lot of respect for the U.S. military, but because of what's going on here, it seems like they kind of lost a lot of that.
Yeah, I would say that's an accurate description. It does seems that way, and I don't know, there's enough questions and circumstances at Joe's apartment, at the vehicle, around the circumstances of him going missing. And I was just looking further in my report, when they went and checked his apartment, there was a big mirror on the bed, right? Which says he never even tried to go to sleep on it that night. Mm-hmm. So, there's a lot of questions left unanswered, and I would imagine that's the hardest thing for him.
Which could lead us to believe then that car was not Joe's car that was leaving at like 3 a.m, that maybe this is just a big misunderstanding. The video might not have anything to do with the disappearance at all.
It might not. It also could be the car that got driven back to base to collect some more evidence to take back out to where he ended up ditching the vehicle later and putting the divorce paperwork, whatever, in it. Could be both.
Okay.
Could be nothing.
All right, there we go. And if everybody's wondering, the Brandon that we discussed, I don't know if he's married that woman from 2011, Joe's ex, or whatever else, but Brandon is still alive out there and living his life. So, after you cover disappearance like this, moving on a little bit here, Lex, of course, I'm guessing you've seen a lot in your 20-plus years in law enforcement. Where do you put this? I realize you were not necessarily in law enforcement at the time, but where do you put this disappearance in, everything that you've done in law enforcement, like, bad circumstances, maybe you've come across horrific car crashes and things like that. Where does this go in your history of law enforcement?
Well, it's one of the bigger mysteries that I've been associated with in law enforcement. And one of the cases that it's one that I think could have been solved and could have been handled better, that left a whole lot of questions out there. And I just can't see why they weren't asked and why they weren't investigated further. And it doesn't necessarily rank like with the horrible car accident or the tragedy in that area.
Yeah.
But it's a tragedy. It's a tragedy either way. If he went missing and now he just died from the elements, or if it was worse and it's a homicide. Either way, someone lost a son, and that's always tragic.
Being that you
ranks in the top few of the top, I would say in the top 5 of mysteries that I have firsthand knowledge of in my career, as far as what really happened and not knowing.
Yeah. Is it, being that you're in law enforcement now and you are you are what, a sheriff of a county or a police chief? Please remind me.
Police chief.
Police chief.
Yeah, chief.
Is this something that, once again, your experience, is this something that a police department like a sheriff's office would have time to go back and look at, or police just too caught up in the everyday stuff, domestic violence calls and car crashes and things like that, to spend the time that is needed to go back and look at this? I mean, how do you look at it, in your position, if this was something that was within your jurisdiction?
Well, when I actually got hired as chief here, we started an investigation on a 50-year-old cold case homicide.
Wow.
And
interesting.
Ann Woodward, if you want to look that one.
Okay, great. Thank you.
We solved that homicide since I got here, and I think you can get caught up in what's going on now, but I think it's very important, especially as technology improves, the abilities of DNA, to have someone who has cold case experience or can learn it, and have somebody look back at some of your unsolved cases and put in some work. I think there's a lot that could be done with this case still. I think this would be one that would be worthwhile. You pull this back up, reactivate it, and get somebody on it. I think there's some pretty basic, easy questions you could go ask and start going down the road fast.
Now I have to ask you, once again, I'm not asking you to trample upon your predecessor or anybody else who worked in the police department over the last 50 years. Your opinion on why, what did it take? You become police chief, you decide to make it a priority. Was it not a priority, or was it like a DNA case where the technology finally caught up with the crime, or, what was it then that after 50 years, we got to take this seriously, and you made the situation a little different?
Well, for us, it was a detective who wanted to solve that cold case, and he was motivated to do that. Over the years, there were several different police officers, sheriff's deputies, even chiefs and sheriffs who had reopened this case, done a lot of work on it, and just with the capability of DNA evidence and everything else at the time that they reopened it, they couldn't get anywhere with it. This detective came here with a lot of experience and recognized that if they could locate the evidence at some point in this case that I was talking about, had been not misplaced, but had been misplaced. I mean, it was in somewhere in this evidence locker, but no one exactly knew. And it just took somebody having some passion for wanting to solve it to go put the work in, find it, recognize that, hey, there are items in here that we could test for DNA now, and we could get answers out of this, and sent them off, and we were able to find the suspect, and he has since passed, and this was quite a long time ago. Okay. We've entered his DNA into CODIS now, though, and we're hoping other agencies will get hits on him. He was an over-the-road trucker. What if we found a serial killer?
Right. So her name is Ann Woodward, Woodward.
That's correct.
In Moab, Utah.
Yep.
Well, congratulations on that, Lex. That is spectacular. Good for you. I know it was a team effort, but you're the one on Unfound, so I'm congratulating you.
Yeah, thank you, and I'll pass that along.
Okay.
Yeah,
Was it a surprise? I have to ask you about that murder. Was it a surprise when the person was identified, or was it kind of known and just took science to prove it?
there were a handful of people who were suspected, one more than others, and it ended up there. But her husband was suspected for a long time,
Right.
and it more or less ruined his life, and he was innocent.
Wow.
So of the two prime, one was husband, one was the other individual, and there were about 4 or 5 others who had been at the bar that night that could have been, and it was that most likely suspect.
Wow.
It turned out to be that individual.
Wow.
Unfortunately, her husband has since passed as well. Always had that.
Wow.
Look over his shoulder, people looking at him funny, suspecting him. Kind of a sad deal. That was part of the motivation too, is get some answers.
Yeah, at least, I mean, however you say that word, posthumously, his character has been cleared. It's been cleaned. He has a clean record. Nobody needs to suspect him anymore.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Did they have any kids? Maybe did the kids live long enough to find this all out?
Yep, one daughter and a granddaughter.
Wow, so they got to, well, that's nice. That's great.
Yeah.
All right, so
we're part of the press conference.
All right, great. Well, we're ending this interview, I guess, then on a high note on that. Lex, you've done a great job. And I'm hoping that the law enforcement agency responsible for Joe's disappearance has heard this and heard from one of their own talking about it and is motivated like you got motivated with this 50-year-old murder, that they go back and take another look at Joe's Bushling's disappearance. Once again, we're not asking necessarily for them to find any particular conclusion. Of course, if it was murder, we want it to be murder. But if they think that it was something else and have reasons to think that, that's fine too. We're just saying that it needs the go over again. That's all we're saying here. We're not looking for any particular resolution. We're just looking for a resolution. Lex, any final words before we complete this interview?
No, I think it is important that we never give up on cases like this and that we always look for answers. So this is a case where I think it would definitely be worth somebody's time to look into it and just get some closure, some answers for a hurting family. And, if people's names that have been mentioned here had nothing to do with it, it'd be great for them to have their names cleared too. But if they did, also justice needs to be served as well. Right.
Once again, we're not pointing the finger at anybody. We realize we brought up Brandon's name, but he's involved because he was the one that allegedly was supposed to. He's the last person that Joe talked to. He was the one that started out. We have to talk about him. I mean, we can't avoid talking about it. That's just the way it goes. We realize there's some suspicious things, but certainly only Brandon knows these answers, and we certainly hope that he is not a murderer. If we're to hope something, we would hope that we hope, of course, Joe's alive out there somewhere living a great life, but if it's not that, we don't want Joe to be murdered. So if Brandon has additional information that he was never asked about, going back to 2011, these things about driving Joe to the airport and all of that, we'd love for him to come forward. He, of course, can contact me at unfoundpodcast@gmail.com. I'd love to talk to him. But Lex, I appreciate you being on this episode of Unfound.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity.
You're very welcome. Stay safe out there.
Okay, thank you.
And that was my November 3rd, 2024 interview with Lex Bell, private investigator, at least at the time, who tried his best to come to a conclusion as to what happened to Joe. I thank Lex for joining me and all of you on this episode. I also want to reiterate that in Lex's current position, Chief of Police for Moab, Utah, he is not responsible in any way to try to resolve Joe's disappearance. It did not happen in his jurisdiction. One more thing. I have made Lex's report available to the public, minus names, phone numbers, and addresses. You can find it by going to the Unfound Podcast discussion group on Facebook and clicking on the Files tab. You can also find it on Unfound's website, theunfoundpodcast.com, on Joe's page. I'm not going to get into the details publicly of how this episode finally came to be. If you want to hear that, I'll be writing and talking about it on Patreon. Patreon.com/Unfound Podcast. Sign up there. If I were to include it in this episode, would be here for another half hour at least. But to surmise it, I think this is the first disappearance I've featured where the family surely did not want me to do it. Like I said, you want the full details, patreon.com/Unfound Podcast. On that note, though, this is the theme of the episode. Many times families need assistance that they don't know they need, and they need it in a way they may not understand or appreciate. It's like the Rolling Stones song. You can't always get what you want, but if you try sometimes, you'll find you get what you need. And that need for families sometimes, well, oftentimes, is someone like myself, maybe many of you, other intelligent and educated people who take an interest in true crime, to come in and not be so deferential, bending over backwards to please that family. Sometimes these families need a devil's advocate, an opposing voice, a come-to-Jesus moment, if you believe in that sort of thing. That is what I would call help. As I said just a few moments ago, if you'd like to hear and read more of my in-depth analysis into the disappearance of Joe Bushling, including how this episode came to be, please go to patreon.com/Unfound Podcast, sign up, and partake in the Unfound blog. Until then, I leave the public theorizing up to you. And that's the program. Right now, while you are in your podcast platform, Spotify, YouTube, iTunes, wherever, give Unfound a 5-star review, a thumbs up, whatever that platform allows. I thank you for listening. I'm Ed Densel, and you've just finished this episode of Unfound.